Hello and welcome to the North Carolina Museum of History and the 27th Annual American Indian Heritage Celebration Education Day. Our presenter, Gwen Locklear, will start in just a moment, but we want to begin with a few notes. Remember, ask questions in the chat and we'll do our best to respond to them and share with Ms. Locklear later on. We have many additional resources about American Indians in North Carolina on our website, nc-aihc.com. We thank the following sponsors of the North Carolina Museum of History Foundation, helping to make this event possible. And now we're going to get started. Gwen Locklear is a member of the Lumbee Tribe. She's an educator and gifted storyteller. She shares traditional folktales that resonate today. Welcome, Gwen. What are you sharing with us today?
Well, I have several stories I'm going to share with you today, and my stories are called trickster stories. And there's usually stories about animals in the wild. I kind of resonate with those, and my stories also will have a moral or a meaning, and sometimes they'll just tell you why something comes to be. But storytelling was always important to us, of course, many years ago, because we didn't have a written language, we didn't have books or regular teachers or anything like that. So that's how our children learned. We learned through the stories. The grandparents would usually share those stories with the children. They would gather them all together and tell them about important things that happened with the tribe or with their family, or just events in general with the community. So that's how they learned, was hearing those stories over and over and over again. So then those children could then share them with theirs along the way. So we didn't have a written language, but we did write kind of like stories, and we did it with pictographs. So we would draw out our story using pictures, and many of you, I'm sure, started out reading picture books. So this is kind of like the same thing, except our pictures were drawn out in a circle. And though this is on a piece of poster board, what would have happened is they would have burned this into an animal skin so they could save it and preserve it to make sure they kept all the facts and stuff correct. So I'm going to read this story with you first. And so where do you think we're going to start reading this story? Does anybody know? Right in the center. So this is the story of the buffalo hunt. And we have two Indian brothers who are going to go hunt for buffalo. So they traveled for 4 days, and then they found two horses that they rode. They got on those horses and they rode through a river, through the woods, crossed a stream, where they made a camp for one night. The next day, they traveled over some mountains, and then they saw some buffalo. So they got on their horses and they took their bow and arrow and they killed a buffalo. Then they traveled back to their camp, where they hung the meat up to dry. And so that's the story of the buffalo hunt and how it would have been preserved. So now let me tell you some other animal stories. Like I said, trickster stories I like to tell. And the first one is going to be how turtle flew south for the winter. Have any of you ever seen a turtle fly? Let me tell you about this one. It was the time of year that the leaves fall from the trees, and Turtle was walking through the woods. It was a beautiful fall day. The sun was shining and beating down on his back, and he was just enjoying his walk. But as he was walking through the woods, he heard all the birds up in the trees just chattering away. Well, Turtle's always kind of curious, so he yells up, "Hey, what's happening?" And the birds said, "We're getting ready to fly south for the winter." Turtle says, "Well, what you want to do that for?" And the bird said, "Don't you know anything? Soon winter will come and there won't be any food for us to eat. But down south, where summer lives, they have lots of food." Well, just as soon as they mention the word food, Turtle says, "I want to come, I want to come. I want to go down south where summer lives and keeps all that food. Can I come with you?" The bird said, "You're a turtle. You can't fly. You have to be able to fly to go down south where summer lives and keeps all that food." Turtle says, but you just have to take me. I have to go. I've got to go down south where summer keeps all that food. I just have to go with you. There's got to be a way. And so one bird spoke up. He said, I have an idea. Said, can you grab hold of a stick and not let it go? Turtle said, hey, when I grab hold of something, I don't turn it loose till I'm good and ready. So the bird said, well, if you grab onto the middle of this stick, we'll get two big birds, get on each end of it, and they ought to be able to lift you off the ground and take you with us. Turtle said, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go down south where summer lives and keeps all that food. So he bit down on the middle of that stick. These two big birds got on each end of it, and they started flapping their wings harder and harder and harder until finally they lifted Turtle up off the ground. Well, Turtle had never been off the ground before, and the higher up they got, the smaller everything started looking on the ground. Then Turtle starts thinking, I wonder how long it's going to take to get down south where summer lives and keeps all that food. I sure hope these birds are going to talk to me. So he starts rolling his eyes. Birds kept right on flying. They didn't pay Turtle not one bit of mind. Now Turtle thinks to himself, how rude can they be? If they're going to take me down south where summer lives and keeps all that food, they could at least tell me, how long is it going to take to get there? What are those mountains over there? So he starts waving his legs. The birds totally ignored him. They didn't pay Turtle not one bit of mind. Yes, Turtle's just thinking to himself, they're rude. They could talk to me. They could tell me about the mountains. They could tell me about that pond over there. Birds kept right on flying. They totally ignored Turtle. Turtle was just beside himself. He couldn't stand it anymore. He says, why don't you? Well, just as soon as he opened his mouth to speak, what did he have to do? Let go of that stick, and when he did, down he fell a long, long way. And when he hit the ground, he hit so hard it was a wonder he hadn't been killed. His shell was cracked all over, and he ached from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail. And he turned and he looked and he saw that pond, and slowly he crawled over to that pond and he dug down deep into the mud to get away from the sky, and he went to sleep. And he slept there all through the winter. And he didn't wake up again until the next spring. So that's why it is today that turtles, who have all those cracked shells now, walk so slow, sleep all through the winter, and only birds fly south where summer lives and keeps all that food. So, what did you think of that story? And number one, what did you learn from that story? Other than, of course, turtles can't fly, but a simple story about a turtle and the birds would teach the children what certain animals do during certain times of the year. So turtles, of course, sleep, hibernate all through the winter, and birds, they fly south where it's nice and warm and lots of food. So hibernation, migration, that's what children could learn from a story like that. So another story for you. Let's see, how about how Rabbit became to look like he does today? You all know what rabbits look like, but long, long ago, rabbits, they looked very different than what they do today. They had little round ears. They had a long, bushy tail. They had long front legs and long, straight rear legs. They looked very different than what they do today. So Rabbit, he was out early spring looking for something to eat because, hey, rabbits just love to eat. And as he's walking around, and he comes up on this willow tree and he looks up and he sees those little green shoots starting to come out on that tree. And he looks at them and he's like, oh my goodness, those look so good. I just wish I could taste them. But hey, we all know rabbits are not good tree climbers. So he had to be content with just walking around and eating what little grass he could find. And as he's walking, he starts thinking, you know, I'd like to play in the snow. I sure wish it would snow. And he thought about what his grandmother told him one time. If you wish for something hard enough, it just might come true. So Rabbit starts wishing about snow. Oh, I wish it would snow. Oh, I wish it would snow. And about that time, he sees a couple of flakes. He gets so excited, he starts singing even harder and louder. Oh, I wish it would snow. Oh, I wish it would snow. And the snow started coming harder and harder. Rabbit started singing louder. Then he started dancing. And as he did all that, the snow just kept falling and falling till it was really, really deep. So deep, in fact, that guess what? He could finally reach those sweet little green shoots on that willow tree. Oh, he eat and eat till he was just so full. And then he was like, ready to go home and take a nap. Well, when he looked around, his home was all covered up in snow. He says, what am I going to do now? Well, right here in this tree, some nice branches here. So he crawls up in those branches, takes his tail and wraps it around the branch, and he falls off to sleep. And he doesn't wake up until the next morning, late in the morning. In fact, it was the warm sunshine that woke him up. And when he woke up, he looks around. Well, guess what that warm sunshine did? Melted all the snow. So Rabbit looks around, what am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this tree? Because, hey, we know rabbits are not good tree climbers. So he's looking around trying to figure out, well, do I start wishing for snow again? And he leans over and looks and whap, about that time, his tail broke off. And when his tail broke off, he started falling through that tree. And as he was falling through that tree, those branches were grabbing his ears, pull and pull, stretch and pull, till his ears were as long as they are today. And as Rabbit fell out of that tree, when he fell out of that tree, he hit the ground so hard that it took his long front legs and jerked him back to the little short legs that he has today. And as Rabbit fell out of that tree, when he fell out of that tree and hit the ground, his long back legs broke and bent. And that's why he has to hop everywhere that he goes now. And when Rabbit fell out of that tree, when he fell out of that tree and hit the ground, he smashed his face, which split his lip. And now we know why Rabbit looks as he does today, with his long floppy ears, his split lip, his little short legs, his bent back legs, and no tail. That's how Rabbit became to look like he does today. And if you don't think this is true, walk out in the woods and find a willow tree in the early spring. And when you look on those little shoots, see if you don't see some rabbit still showing up every spring on all those little shoots in that willow tree. So, what did you think of that story? That's a story that tells you how something came to be. And so now we know why Rabbit looks like he does. So let me tell you another story. Beaver and Turtle, how they met. Long, long ago, Turtle, he had the most beautiful place to live that there ever was. He had a nice little pond. He had green, grassy banks that he could go out and sun on. There were trees on one side, so when it got hot, he could crawl up on the bank, just rest in the shade. He had plenty of fish to eat, and he just thought he had the most perfect place in the whole world. And as the season started to change, it was time for Turtle to go to sleep. So he dives into the pond, swims down to the bottom, buries into the mud, and he goes to sleep. And he sleeps all through the winter. In fact, he slept so hard that he slept longer than he normally would. The waters had already started getting warm. And as he dug out of the mud and started swimming to the top, he's thinking to himself, I don't remember having to swim this deep. Something just doesn't look right. And when he gets to the top and he looks around, and his beautiful home doesn't look anything like what it did when he went to sleep. He looks around, he says, what happened to my beautiful pond? Where are my trees? My bank, it's covered in water. What is going on? And he looks and he sees where all his trees had been cut. And there was a dam down at the other end. And he's like, who did this to my beautiful pond? Oh, what has happened? Whomp! He hears something at the other end of the pond, and he looks, and he sees this strange creature swimming towards him. He's thinking to himself, wonder who that is and what's he doing in my pond? And when he gets up close, Turtle said, who are you and what are you doing in my pond? The creature said, my name is Beaver. And he shows those big, sharp, ugly yellow teeth. He said, and I chopped down those trees, and I built that dam, and I have made this a bigger pond, and this is mine, and you need to leave. Turtle said, oh no, this is my pond, and you need to leave. Beaver said, no, we have to decide who's staying and who's leaving, and it's going to be you. Turtle said, no, not me. He said, I'm a brave warrior, and I will fight you. Beaver said, I'm ready, because I can call in all my relations, and we can gnaw your neck off. Well, Turtle looked at them teeth, and he didn't doubt for 1 minute that Beaver could do just that. Turtle thinks to himself, tells him, I'm just a great, brave warrior, and having a fight with you probably would not be fair. We need to think of something else to decide who's going to be the master of this place. And Beaver said, what do you want to do then? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? So Turtle said, well, did you have any ideas? Beaver said, let's see who could stay underwater the longest. He said, I can stay under there all day. Turtle was about to suggest the same thing, but he thinks, well, hey, if he can stay under all day, he'll definitely beat me at that. And Turtle says, no, that'll be too easy. Let's have a competition. Let's see who can swim the fastest and get to the other side of the pond. And the winner will claim this pond as their own. Beaver said, that sounds like a perfect thing for us to do. We'll race. I'm a great swimmer. Well, Turtle's thinking to himself, he can't be that great. I'm sure that hey, I can beat him. So he tells Beaver, he says, I'm such a great swimmer, I'll even let you have a head start. Beaver said, great, I'll take it. I don't need it, but I'll take it. So they line up, and Turtle lets Beaver have a whole body length space in front of him. And they took off. So as Beaver took out, Turtle starts right behind him, right close to his tail, and they start swimming. Well, it wasn't too long when Turtle realizes, Beaver's a better swimmer than I thought he was. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So Beaver's just swimming hard, and Turtle's just swimming as hard as he can just to try and stay close to him. And so as they're swimming along, Turtle gets an idea, and he sticks out his long neck, and he grabs hold of the end of Beaver's tail. Well, Beaver felt something grab onto his tail, and he starts shaking it, trying to get it off. He didn't dare turn around to look because he had to win that race. And as he's swimming and swimming and swimming, Turtle bit down just a little bit harder. And when he did, Beaver lifted his tail up and back and forth, trying to swing whatever was on his tail off. And Turtle bit down just a little bit harder. And when Beaver lifted that tail up that next time with all the strength he had, when he got to the top, Turtle let go, and guess where he landed? Right on the other side of the bank. And when Beaver looked up, there sat Turtle. And guess what? Beaver had to leave because Turtle had beat him across the pond. And so Beaver left. Turtle now had his pond back. And hey, it was bigger than what it was before. There was going to be more fish than what it was before. His bank came back, and his trees were going to grow back. And so Turtle's thinking to himself, I still have the most beautiful place in all the world to live right here in my pond. So that's a story about Beaver and Turtle and how they met and how Beaver showed off his skills and Turtle showed off his wits. So I have another story to share with you. How many of you have ever seen a possum? Aren't they the most beautiful animals you've ever seen before? And of course, most of the time we usually see them side of the road because after all these years, they still haven't learned how to cross the road. But long, long ago, Possum, he had the most beautiful tail of all the animals. His tail had long, silky hair, and it was just covered with all this beautiful hair. And Possum, he liked nothing better than to take those long, skinny fingers and comb the hair on his tail, and he'd go about all the other animals. Just look at my tail. I have the most beautiful tail of all the animals. Just look at my tail. And he would do that every day, day in and day out. He would stick his tail in front of all the animals' faces. Just look at my tail. I have the most beautiful tail. Well, one day the animals are sitting around and they're like, oh, Lord, it's about time for Possum to come and start talking about that tail of his again. We got to do something about this. I just can't stand it anymore. He's going to stick it in my face. Look at my tail. Look at my tail. Well, Rabbit jumps up. I'll take care of it. Well, he's a trickster, and sometimes he can do some really bad things. And they said, well, Rabbit, we don't want you to hurt him. He said, I won't hurt him, but now I'll take care of this tail problem we got with him. They said, don't even tell us what you're going to do. Just handle it. So later on that night, Rabbit goes over to Possum's house, comes in. Possum says, well, hello, Rabbit. How are you? You came to look at my tail, didn't you? I have the most beautiful tail of all the animals. And Rabbit said, yeah. But I come with an important message from Chief Bear. He wants you to speak at the council meeting tomorrow. Possum said, me? He wants me to speak? I know why. It's because I have the most beautiful tail of all the animals. It's just so beautiful. And Rabbit looks down and he says, well, Possum, he says, your tail looks a little bit dirty. And Possum said, oh, no, you think? He said, yeah. He says, whatever am I going to do? I want it to look its best tomorrow when I speak in front of speak at the tribal council. What am I going to do? And Rabbit said, well, if you want me to, I can mix up some of my special medicine we can put on it. Possum said, you would do that for me? Rabbit said, sure, we're friends. I'll take care of it. So Rabbit goes out, makes up his special medicine, and he comes back and he starts putting it all over Possum's tail. He says, now, I want you to leave this on your tail all night. In fact, let's wrap it up in this snake skin. Keep it nice and tight. Leave it on there all night, and don't take it off till you get to the council meeting tomorrow. Possum was so excited. He said, Rabbit, I just don't know how I'm ever going to thank you for doing this for me. And he said, not a problem. He says, we're friends. I'm just taking care of you. Possum says, I just don't know how to thank you, but Lord knows I'll be so glad to see what it looks like tomorrow. Possum, he hardly could sleep a wink that night because all he could think about was how beautiful his tail was going to look when he got to that council meeting the next day. That morning got up, he heads over to the council meeting, and Chief Bear calls him up, and Possum gets up there in front of all of the animals. He's got this great big grin on his face, and he starts smiling and walking back and forth. My friends, I have been asked to speak at this council meeting because of my tail. I have the most beautiful tail of all the animals. And about that time, he reached around there and he snatched that snake skin off. And when he did, all the hair fell off of his tail. His tail was naked, it was ugly, and all the animals, they started laughing. And when Possum turned around and saw his tail, the grin on his face froze and he passed out from fright. And he didn't wake up again until all the animals had left to go home. So now that's why it is today that Possum, who still has that silly grin on his face, now has the ugliest tail of all the animals. So, from that story, what did you learn? How about bragging about something you have, bragging about something you can do or whatever? And that's not a good thing to do because, as you can see in Possum's case, he lost the most beautiful thing that he had because he kept bragging about it all the time. So now, let me share another story about the race at White Hill. Long ago, White Boy the deer, he liked nothing better than just bragging about how fast he was. He was a fast runner. Well, he did that all the time. And Kaya the turtle, he just got tired of hearing it. And one day, as Deer just bragging about how fast he was, he's like, "Oh, you're just all talk. All you do is talk about how fast you are. You're not the fastest. Hey, I can outrun you." And Deer just rolled over laughing. He says, "No way." And the other animals are standing around, and they thought, well, Turtle's a great warrior, but as far as traveling, he's kind of slow. But they argued, Deer and Turtle, for 3 days, back and forth about who was the fastest. Deer says, "I can run from Red Bank to Big Bay in half a day." Kaya the turtle said, "That's nothing. I can do that in half that time. Why, that's just a snail's pace." And they just kept on until finally the animal kingdom said, "Enough is enough. Maybe we just need to have a contest to settle this." And Deer says, "Oh, I like that idea. Let's start at sunup and just race till the moon rises." And Bear says, "No, Deer, that's just too long. How could we even judge something like that? Let's think of something more that we could be able to judge. How about just a shorter distance?" And he says, "We got 4 fields over here." He says, "How about y'all have a race, go through the 4 fields. There's a field of red corn, a field of bushy beans, a field of broadleaf tobacco, and a field of squash. And in between each one is a big old wide ditch. So the first one that crosses all those 4 fields and through the ditches will be the winner." And the animal kingdom, everybody around, yeah, that's a good idea. Deer said, "Oh, that's just going to be too easy for me. But hey, I'm going to do it." And Turtle's just like, "Easy peasy, I'll beat him, no problem." And so they decided that this race would be done at White Hill, which is where they all had met. And they called this place White Hill because it had all this beautiful crystal white sand that sit on really low hills. It was just a beautiful place. He said, well, we'll meet here on the dawn of the first morning after the first new moon. They all agreed, and they were just so excited that this race was going to come up and they could settle this big argument between these two. So the day came. Before the day came, Turtle met with all of his relations. They had a big meeting along the Lumbee River that night, and he tells his family, his turtle cousins, his turtle wife, his turtle children, they're all sitting around, and Kaya the turtle is like, I know, I shouldn't have done it. I just couldn't help myself. I just couldn't help myself. Deer was just bragging so badly about how fast he could run, and before I knew it, I just opened my mouth and said I could beat him. And I know I can't, but I could win this race with a little help from my family. So the day of the race finally come, and at dawn, they came to White Hill. They're lined up there, and as Deer had promised, he let Turtle start. He says, I'll let you go first. I'll give you a head start through the first field. And, you know, as Turtle had told him, he didn't need to go ahead of him, but hey, he'll take it. So Turtle takes off, starts crawling through that first field of big red corn. Well, they waited and waited, and the sun was high up in the sky before they saw Turtle finally crawling out of that first field of big red corn. So Chief Bear, he goes up to the top of White Hill, and he's standing up there on a stump, and he has his big old paw raised to get ready to start the race. And as he saw Turtle come out, he dropped his paw down and said, go. And Deer took off, just like lightning. Zip, zip. Started running through that big field of red corn. He's thinking to himself, I'll be at the finish line before Turtle can crawl out the first ditch. Well, when he got through the first field, that big red corn, he looks up, and what does he see? He sees Turtle crawling into the ditch, the second field of the bushy beans. He's like, how in the world did that happen? How did he get that far ahead of me? So he speeds up his pace. He says, I'll catch him this time. I'll catch him before he gets into that third field. I know I'll catch him. So he runs through that field of them bushy beans. And when he comes out, he just rubs his eyes and he looks, because there's Turtle crawling into the third ditch. And he's like, how? This just can't be happening. This just can't be real. Well, he's already getting kind of hot and tired and sweaty, but he says, I know I can beat him. I'll just take bigger leaps and bounds. So he starts through that third field of that broadleaf tobacco, and he's just going harder and harder and harder. And when he comes out and he's getting ready to go through that fourth field, he's like, I know I'm ahead of him. I know I am. But he looks and he sees Turtle's getting ready to crawl out of the third ditch to the finish line. And Deer's like, oh my gosh, I've just got to speed this thing up. So he takes off through that last field of big old yellow squash. And when he comes out, he's just tired, he's dripping with sweat, and he's like, I know I have got to be ahead. And as he starts to go through the last ditch to the finish line, he looks up, and what does he see? Turtle's crossing the finish line. Well, Deer's just so exhausted, can't believe what he's seeing. He just drops right there. He can't go on any further because he's thinking, how in the world did this happen? How did Turtle beat me? And as Kaya the turtle crossed over that finish line, all the animal kingdom started cheering. Turtle's the fastest runner. Turtle is the fastest runner. Yeah, he's the fastest runner. And so that settled the argument. Now, the animal kingdom started wondering a little bit, how did Turtle do all this? But hey, he won. He crossed the finish line. So that night, the Turtle clan had a stomp dance. And as all of his relations showed up, his turtle wife, his turtle children, his turtle cousins, they were all gathering around. But you know what? All of Turtle's relatives, they all looked just alike. And so what Turtle had done was he had his family, like his cousin was the one that started the race. Then he had other family members positioned at other parts at those 4 fields. So he had one in each ditch. He had one that was hiding in each of the fields. And so when deer came out of that last field of the golden squash, Kaya the turtle came out from hiding so he could cross the finish line. And so that's how it is that Kaya the turtle became known as the fastest runner among the animal kingdom. Now it's said that the animal kingdom kind of figured that Turtle cheated somehow, but they just couldn't figure out how he done it. And nobody ever asked. So that's the way it was left. And Turtle was the fastest runner, the animal kingdom. And guess what? Deer didn't brag anymore about how fast he was. So I am going to shut down this part of it and see if there's any questions that anybody has. And we'll just move forward with that. I hope everyone enjoyed the stories and enjoy the rest of the day.
They did enjoy the stories. People are saying, whoa. And some of the lessons people are learning is not to brag. Karma is real. Patience is a good thing. But some of the questions, a lot of the questions are similar is, how did you start storytelling? Did you write all your stories? Are these Lumbee stories particularly? Those are some of the questions we can start with.
Okay. When I started, which was many, many years ago, I would come across stories as I would be looking, researching, or whatever, especially when my kids were young. I started doing some mini presentations at their schools. And so I started coming across these stories. And when I would find one that kind of like reached out to me, then I would kind of like take that story and, tweak it up a little bit to make it my own. And over the years, I've just adapted certain stories to what I wanted them to be. And like the last story I told about Kaya the turtle, that is like a old Lumbee tale that I found in Mr. Arvis Bogman's book of Lumbee tales. And he was just thrilled that I chose one of his stories to turn into one of my own. But I like animals, turtle, rabbit, deer. Those are my favorites. And so because of that, I like to find those stories. And of course, those that have a moral, a meaning, or that children can learn from in general.
So some of these stories are Lumbee stories that you learned and made your own. Are these stories told to Lumbee children throughout the community?
Not like they would have been years ago, but when we have powwows or special events, and probably like during Indian Heritage Month, these are the kind of times that people would share stories that they've heard throughout the years. There is like real stories that my dad would tell me, like about the mules that they used to get, and how Granddaddy would buy a mule, and back in those days, if the mule didn't work out, you could take them back, which I found, kind of strange that you could buy a mule, and if the mule didn't work, you could take him back and get another one. And that particular mule that my dad told me about is like his ears wouldn't stand up. So my granddaddy said he's going to be too stubborn. We're not going to be able to get him to work. So Daddy said they had to take him back, make sure they got one where his ears would stand up, because you didn't want one with them ears laying down. So things like that, you know, those kinds of stories. So it'd be like family traditions, or, you know, special events within the family. Those kinds of stories are what's shared, like, you know, during Thanksgiving and Christmas, when family reunions, you know, get together and they would tell the family stories.
And do you have a favorite story everybody wants to know?
A favorite story? Between How Turtle Flew South and Possum's Tail. Those are, between the two, I don't know which one I like the best, but if I go to do a storytelling session, those two will always be part of my presentation, because those two are my favorite.
Can you share any information with us, just a little bit about the Lumbee Tribe?
About the Lumbee Tribe, we're the largest tribe in North Carolina, and also the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River. And, you know, surely you will learn or know that there are 8 tribes here in North Carolina. And so we just happen to be the largest one. There's probably 65,000 members now. And we're originally from Robeson County in the Pembroke area, where UNC Pembroke is the university there. That's where I graduated from college. And that school was initially started back in the late 1800s as a school for Indians, to teach them how to be teachers, because our leaders knew that the way for us to persevere and make it in the world, it was going to start with education. And so that's how that started.
So, what do you hope students, audiences take away from your stories? What messages do you want them to get?
Let's see. That learning can be fun, because, as I said, that's how our children learned, was through storytelling. And, you know, it's all about finding a way to make it interesting, to grab your attention, and so that you want to learn. So just like, you know, what birds and turtles do through the winter months, about bragging, about feeling self-confident, and just basically just moral stories to, you know, build up your confidence about who you are and be proud of who you are.